Let's call the meeting to order. I believe tonight's agenda will include an update from Blythe on any additional information on warrant articles, after which we will go through and we'll be able to ask questions. But then after that, we'll go through and vote on what articles that we can.
Sure.
We are scheduled to have input from the zoning committee
On the 30th.
So not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that?
Right, and the reason that he asked to come on the 30th is because the planning board is meeting on the 29th? 8th. And they will make their recommendations at that meeting. So he felt it was best to wait so he knew what the planning board recommendations would be.
And that's going to cover Articles 19 and higher, I believe, by Blythe's wonderful.
Until they get renumbered, because the selectmen decided last night they want zoning first, so I have to fix everything. For now, they're 19.
They're number one, okay. Okay, well.
So everyone goes home after that, or?
If we ever get to go home.
Can I ask a question about the zoning articles before we move on?
Certainly.
Do we know if, is the language that you gave us final?
No,
No,
it is
it's
not.
very much
It is
in
not.
process.
That's part of why we're there.
Yeah, and so I want to go over all that with you.
They
The
had
language is not final, and we also want to hear the zoning committee's recommendation.
No,
To me, that's pretty
I read
important.
it though, and I was like, this is sort of odd, so.
It
What?
is still odd, so with your pleasure, I can go through all of that.
No.
Is that tonight or is that next meeting?
It's the 30th.
The 30th will be Articles 19 and higher, to be renumbered. So for now, we're not going to discuss those. We're going to cover, and I will let Blythe update us on any information she has on 1 through 18.
Yeah, just to tell you about what the selectmen decided last night, they do want the zoning articles first, so those would be really 19 through 23. And that I expect that we will even reorder those so that the B1 district is the lead, is number one.
Okay.
The version that's in the warrant right now is written to look like each section is a different article. When I spoke with Rich McCarthy, the planner, this morning, I think we're headed towards one article, one motion for the whole thing. But we're talking to the Attorney General's office, we're talking to council, we're working to figure out the best way to do that. So I expect that of all the articles in here, that's the one that will change the most. Everything else has been reviewed by council and is in good shape.
Very good.
And the selectmen will execute the document on the 29th, and then whatever, and we will add in, with Sue's help, add in your votes, and that still gives us the time on the 30th to finish any off that you still need to act on, because we need to post the warrant on no later than the 4th in order to meet the 14 days in advance rule.
November 4th.
November 4th.
Okay.
So turning to the spreadsheet, does everyone have the version that's got the yellow line in the middle? So with Todd's help and discussions with the board last night and some just thoughts more after our meeting here next week, there are a few changes. Starting at the top, on Article 1, we added $15,000 for town council services to deal with the lawsuit defense for 43 Rockwood Road. I think I mentioned that last week. And the selectmen last night had a similar reaction to what to do about the snow and ice deficit as this group did last week, which is prefer to use free cash to close it out rather than to add, how much on the tax rate?
Almost 13 cents
Almost 13 cents
per thousand.
per thousand. So we've added as to be funded from free cash. That number you see there is the deficit from last fiscal year.
Okay.
There was also a strong reaction last night to we've got to start finding money for roadway improvements. And I have to pass around, should you like to look at, this is the presentation that DPW made last night. In there are some excellent slides on pavement management and pavement conditions and what we should be spending. It's kind of depressing. So you can watch the video from last night or scroll through that. But Todd and I met this morning and said, okay, how the heck are we going to pull this off? Because we don't want to go into the rest of the fiscal year with not a fair amount of free cash for things that might come up, snow and ice we haven't gotten to enjoy yet, and budget balancing and all those really important things. So our recommendation is to borrow, to spend $100,000, which is in the grand scheme of 12 million, not a lot, but it's a place to start, and it will get us, if you think of the section on Medway Branch Road from, was it Tucker? Is that the?
I think it's Tucker, yeah.
Tucker to the DPW, it could, $100,000 would probably do twice that. It's not a lot, you know, that's a reclamation project, but we could probably add 2 smaller streets into the plan next year and get those done with this.
And you are at Article 6 now, I believe, yes?
Correct, Article 6. So, that's what so that you're seeing this a couple hours after the board did, that we just, we did this morning. I would prefer not to use free cash because I want to be prepared for the other things that may come through in the rest of the year. And how much do we typically spend in the fall? About half?
Yeah.
So it's a little less than that, you know, that tracks with what Norfolk's been doing. And we believe that as we've had some other short-term debt coming off, it would be a responsible amount to borrow these 3 things and not have that budget for debt go up, you know, to cause us other structural problems. So, you know, is it all we should be spending? Absolutely not, but I think it's a place, my goal is to the board, let's start here. Let's show everybody that we take it seriously and we're starting to do something about it, and we're gonna work towards, as we can afford to, adding to it each year and slowly changing the tide of the situation with our roads.
So just to make sure I understand, so we'll borrow the 100K. Debt servicing is, we've got other stuff rolling off, so the budget line for debt servicing will be sort of a wash. We just got it, okay.
Yep, is
I just
that
wanna
a
make
good
sure I
way to put it?
understood what-
Yeah, so I think what I tried to explain to one of the selectmen today was, you know, we have borrowed, for instance, we borrowed for Lake Street 5 years ago. We've pretty much paid that off, so we can infill that with, you know, the rest of the Lake Street money. I think it's a, you know, I understand that there's some folks who would rather not have debt, but I think when we've got some big expenditures like expensive trucks or things like this, it's a way to get those done with, as long as you don't do it too much and try to push everything to just paying for it long term. I think you have to have a combination of things you pay cash for, things that you borrow, and then obviously large projects like buildings that you borrow for, you know, many years.
So inside levy borrowing on your sheet here means?
Within the budget.
Within the budget.
Okay.
So, and it doesn't do us, as folks trying to balance the budget, any good to borrow an awful lot and make balancing the budget even harder.
So what does borrow mean as a verb in this context? It's inside the budget, we're not, I mean, it's inside the existing revenue.
We're going outside of our cash to a bank to get the borrowing.
Outside of the cash, is
Yep.
what you're saying.
So
Right,
we-
right, so it's new borrowing that will replace borrowing that's being retired.
Right.
Correct.
So what does inside levy mean?
You don't need to go for a vote to have outside,
The 2.5% increase.
2.5% increase.
The debt
Yeah.
service fits underneath our 2.5.
Got it, increase that we
I
can.
mean, eventually, I'd like to get to the point where we have a policy about how we do these, and so that we, again, we enforce some discipline on ourselves about we only borrow for certain things, we pay cash for things that don't last very long, you know, that we get to the point where this is how we work in Norfolk. But Todd and I are very, you know, want to be concerned about not borrowing so much that we make it difficult to balance the budget, because we're obligated to that debt. We have to pay it back. And so we want to use it judiciously.
It's reasonable to me, if this is CapEx expenditure, we borrow for CapEx, that makes sense.
And then the other changes since last week, I talked with the police department further about the radios, and have decided we're gonna recommend buying half the radios this year and half next, rather than a third. I'd feel more comfortable, and I think they would, that all of our, almost all of our full-time staff have at least a new radio, and then the others that we need will go to reserve officers and detail officers and backups in the second year.
And
Last time there was the question of if only half the people are able to get the new radios, does everyone have to really wait? Because person A can't.
They'll
help
still
person B.
work amongst all of our own staff within town. We'll be able to communicate.
There's backwards compatibility, in other words.
Exactly.
it was, I was gonna say, and it was written into her new write-up.
I updated that
Okay.
in the write-up,
That's
yeah.
the only real change I saw in that, so that was.
Yeah, and I gave some more information about the roll-off truck, and I got even more today, so we can talk about that some more if you'd like. I don't think there was anything else that we changed, was there? So what we've done now is we undid the columns so you can see what's coming, what the total is, what's coming from free cash, what's coming from other sources. We got, through Todd's work, we got the free cash certified late last week at 1,142,000. So we'd spend just under 5 and have 645 left for whatever else we need to deal with this rest of this year.
I'm so sorry, can you do that one more time?
Sure. So free cash was certified by the state on Friday. Until that's done, we don't have any free cash to spend. Oh, let's get you the newest one. It's at the bottom.
Okay, that,
So
go.
we would
Thank you so much.
spend 496, 753. Where did we get the 7 cents from? And that would leave us a free cash balance for the rest of the year of 645, 270 and some change.
Can I ask like a couple newbie questions?
Of course.
This utilization number, is this, akin to similar years? Like, do we know how this is similar to a prior year?
Similar.
Two other newbie questions. One is pavement program for roadways. Do we already have a budget for that, and this is just adding to that budget?
I think that's what's really been difficult in Norfolk is that are you familiar with the term Chapter 90?
A bit.
So
but-
the state has it's a chapter of the law called Chapter 90, and what they do is based on a formula of how many miles of road that you have that they recognize that's accepted, they provide a payment to each community based on that, and ours is about 400,000.
Okay.
In the last, how many years?
For what?
How long have we only been spending Chapter 90?
Several, all that I've been here, and then some before that.
3, 4, 5 years, we've only budgeted 400,000, when if you look at this, we should be spending $1 million to not have our pavement condition go down.
Okay.
So now the goal is, and there's been a lot of frustration by residents, hey, our roads are terrible, yeah, they're about a D.
Right.
We get a 66, and when I went to school, that was a D.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it is today, but.
So this is just trying to increase
So we're
it.
slowly trying to, okay, let's focus on that more, let's start putting aside some now and grow it. I think the other thing we have to think about is that we could spend $1 million on it, but we have limited ability for our staff to do all the prep work before the contractor comes in to work. They can't necessarily carry out all the work that needs to be done to be ready to pave at $1 million with the 9 people we have in highway and grounds. So not saying we don't want to spend as much as we could to get our roads in good shape, but we have to think about the workload or what we wouldn't do to be ready for that and how much it costs.
Right.
So it's all striking the balance.
I'm guessing that when this comes to town meeting, people will ask if there are roads in mind, or
Absolutely.
how that is being kind of facilitated. So if I
So-
vote for this, how will I know if my road gets
So
fixed?
we will, before then, I think we will identify some. The downside of that is you say, okay, I'm picking Ash Road and Smith Street, and you live on Maple, you're gonna be like, hey, what about mine?
Might be worth bringing a 5-year plan.
Right, or talking about the approach. I know we did, as one of the exercises in town, people had to kind of note places that were rough on the roads, and there's been some work done to identify those places,
The
so.
complete streets.
Right, so if that is being used in any way, it could be useful to remind people that the information exists, the town has it, they kind of know where these problems are.
Yeah, so I would encourage you watching his presentation and hearing what he has to say about it as well, because we certainly have all that, and Complete Streets is a great example of us being prepared to do projects, and so we went through that whole process, and state has $400,000 available in grants for you to actually do one of those projects. The hard part is you have to have it all engineered, designed, ready to go out to bid. Well, we don't have the money to get the engineering done, so we can't apply for the 400,000.
Right.
So that's where we've gotta start to try to be proactive so that we can go grab that 400,000, because that would be a great, or 350 or whatever it is, to address a street that needs to be more complete, that also needs to be, is in bad shape, and really make some headway.
And may I ask one more question? Sorry to capitalize.
No
So in
pun
terms
intended.
of the radios, did we reduce anything else, or is this a straight addition to do that?
We didn't reduce anything else, but what we're suggesting is we're getting back, about $35,000 from the regional dispatch, because they got a grant. We were gonna put all, 25, almost 26,000 towards the fire
Tablets.
tablets, and we're gonna also put the balance of that 8,500 towards these radios.
Okay.
There's still more coming out of free cash, but we're gonna use what's coming back to us in full rather than in part.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah?
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
A couple things actually, that where you say the KP budget, it would be important at the town meeting to identify that that's the money that we voted but couldn't be spent because the other two towns didn't come up to that.
You're correct.
That's correct, right?
You are
All right.
correct.
And then, a follow-up, just a commentary on the roads. Many years ago, we had an override for roads that went for 1 year for roads and then was absorbed into the general budget. So something to keep in mind as you develop a plan for that. That pissed off a lot of
I can appreciate that.
residents,
Sure. Because it's a permanent increase in your tax rate,
and you're not getting what you voted for.
and you're not getting what you voted for, sure.
So just something to keep in mind.
No, I can appreciate that. Do you ever know how long ago that was?
It's 10 years maybe, it's less, 10, 8, I don't know. I can go back, I have stacks of town meeting warrants in my desk, so I'll go back and look.
Well, that's what I said last night, folks. Budgeting is really, really hard because there's so many competing demands and so many good things we should do and, or want to have as services, and it's only a limited pool of funds.
We've gotten through Article 7, this is as far as we've progressed. Keep in mind, part of the goal is for us to take some votes tonight on things that we feel comfortable with. Any questions people have, particularly on 5, 6, or 7? I know 5 is the large effort to go back in and update our compensation and pay policy schedule, all that good stuff. Of course, we've been talking about capital projects. I know, Jonathan, you weren't here last time. I know any specific things you might have?
No questions.
Okay. People are feeling good, okay? And do the warrant, the articles here. 5, there was no other updates. So I don't think that there were any outstanding outstanding questions regarding the,
No, I don't have
HR
any noted,
classification.
no.
okay.
Article 6 will have to be rewritten, right? To include the 100,000? It's not-
Yes, it will,
Yeah, okay.
yeah. Like I said, we just met on this morning, so.
Okay, so 6 is being rewritten.
There was an open question on the roll-off truck. I'm trying to remember what it was.
It had something to do with
Jackie asked a
life.
The
question.
lifetime, the
Life
life
expectancy.
expectancy.
Yeah, just the expected. Yeah, the point
Was that
made.
answered?
Well, that it's longer than, say, a police cruiser because that it's used all the time, so it's actually shorter.
So I, of course, I left one of those pieces of paper on the printer upstairs, but got from DPW in the last week, besides what I updated in the packet, that they're making, in 2019, they anticipate making 281 trips from the transfer station to wherever they go for trash, cardboard, plastic, glass, metal, and wood. And they go to Millbury, Auburn, Franklin, Taunton, and Walpole. That's generally where they haul everything. I also asked them to cost out what our person to drive a truck and gas and repairs and all go into, what would be our hourly rate. Came up to about $67 an hour. They went out and talked to 2 other haulers in the area, said, what would you charge us to go to you know, these places on, and, the two firms were telling us on this number of trips and the time it takes to do this work, probably would be, in the, depending on which one it was, $60,000 to $90,000 a year more than we spend. So while we didn't factor into ours the price of buying a truck, which, you know, certainly is a cost, we would have to increase our budget by some amount to, our operating budget, to be able to contract it out if we didn't buy a truck. So, you know, how long will the truck last? I mean, the trucks, and there was a lot of discussion about this last night at the meeting, the truck's engine's in great shape, that's not the problem. It's the frame what they're concerned about. It does need a new transmission, that's at least $10,000, so I think if we don't replace it and they try to keep it together, we're gonna have to spend more money in maintenance
Can we
repairs.
sell it? What, is there any, I don't know,
There is definitely eBay for municipalities, there's a municipal, there's public surplus, and, oh yeah, you definitely,
would that be the plan? I guess that's the question.
I think so, yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to think, is it worth trading in to get something else, or is it so far, you know, it's better to try and sell it,
Who does that work? The DPW
Yeah.
would do the,
yep,
and then that money would go,
general fund,
general.
right? So, our argument still is it's the best play. Will it last, you know, why is this one only lasted 13 years? I'm having a hard time answering that. I know that it's out, that Sterling, the maker, is not in business anymore, so replacement parts are a little more challenging.
But our note is for 5 years on this thing, if I recall, right?
For a truck would be 5 years, yeah.
5 years.
Because of the amount of use that it has.
No, for the debt.
It's anticipated
Oh, I'm sorry.
lifespan. I mean, there's rules about how long we can borrow things
Got it.
for. You know, a new building, you know, the police station, what is that?
25 years.
25.
Yeah.
Roadways, 15 years, vehicles, 5 years. Just set up in the general laws.
Okay.
I guess the bell that would go off in my head is if, you know, we're taking a 20-year debt for, you know, 13.
Definitely not.
Okay.
And it behooves us to be paying it off so that as we have another truck of, you know, snowplow 5-ton trucks are equally as expensive, if not more, new fire trucks. And we have to plan for those at some point, so we don't want to put all our debt in one place and then not be able to utilize that tool later.
So it says this was a priority for the last 3 years. Has this been on the list for the past 3 years and it got removed, or what's kind of the history of them?
I think
with that?
budgets were probably very tight, and DPW said, we'll figure out a way to keep it going, and it was passed over
Okay.
in favor of other things. I mean, I wasn't here, but does that sound,
Essentially correct, yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
You will bring, I assume, on Article 1, the latest and greatest transfer sheet for us to vote on that day? Sometimes there's changes to this, which occur at the last minute.
I hope there's no more changes. Do you think we'll have any more?
At this point, there won't be any more changes.
Smaller list in spring.
Very good,
You're right.
okay.
Well, I mean, I can't promise we won't have them in the spring, but to the best of our knowledge, we're in good shape otherwise.
Okay. Part of me is thinking about taking, if people are interested in making a motion to vote on the financial things we've talked about so far, before we get further afield. Are there any, if there's no other questions, happy to entertain a motion from 1 through 7 that we're discussing currently.
I'll put a motion to vote for 1 through 7.
We can do one at a time, just so we can start with 1.
Second.
So that'll be for Article 1. Any discussion? No discussion. Okay, all in favor of voting for Article 1, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So Article 1 carries.
Okay, great, thanks.
Article 2 is inapplicable because we have no unpaid bills, I believe. Wonderful. Ride sharing, again, this is, I think, pretty self-explanatory. We'd love to take advantage of the grant, I believe it is.
Yes, what we were talking about
Okay.
is, there, out of the conversations about the traffic at Pine and Everett came a interest in buying a solar-powered radar sign that could be deployed different places. So the conversation between DPW and the police department is to use the ride-sharing funds for a portion of it, and the rest to come from the DPW, the police department's operating budget. So no additional, we have to appropriate the funds, but we'll match them with operating funds to buy the actual sign.
So $1,000 plus the 8,000, or plus the $10,000 gets us closer.
No, this is two different things. Number 3 is just the ride-sharing funds that we have to appropriate. And number 3 is a trailer-mounted orange message board sign.
Number 4.
Sorry, 4.
I got confused.
Okay, so two different things.
They're
The
two different
radar, the solar-mounted radar sign.
It's a sign about this big. It's, that's
Your speed
powered
is-
by, that your speed is 45 when it's supposed to be 40.
Pine and Everett it's the one down by the other side of 1A, right?
Yep.
Okay, just making sure.
It's not necessarily gonna go there, but
I just wanted to.
But, so we have, this is $1,208.20 we need to spend. There's an interest in buying this sign. I said, great, let's use $1,208 plus about another, probably $3,000 from the police department's current budget to buy it, so
How much are these signs?
depending on which size, 3,500 to 4,500. It's extra to get it solar powered.
I realize what I'm, if you'll allow me a little bit of, this is kind of out of bounds from what we're discussing, but has there been any discussion or consideration of potentially spending more and getting a speed camera on these signs and electronically issuing speeding tickets?
As a traffic calming measure, I think you're referring.
More than that.
I'd have to research
Well,
the,
tickets, I know is a whole new,
Well, the reason I ask is, big deal, you have flashed someone's speed in front of them and they go on their merry business and keep speeding. Like, I'm sure there's some psychological benefit to seeing that you're speeding, but at the end of the day, I'd rather not spend the money on something that's not necessarily gonna provide a tangible benefit.
I don't know
For
that,
us?
I'd have to ask the chief whether we can actually issue tickets that way in Massachusetts. It'd be first question I have, and second one, we've had a lot of pushback about, and noise about people frustrated with intersections in town. Park Street, Boardman and Rockwood, which we're actually about to go live with something similar. Pine and Everett, you name it, so we wanna be able to, at least for a small price point, be able to make people more aware of their speed. Know where to deploy, better to deploy actual officers and radar, so that we can ticket them for. I just don't know the answer to whether we can actually issue a ticket off of those.
Just a point of how all this works.
Yeah.
So if this is, so my concern, I hear your point, like, if we do a little bit more, are they only asking for the bare minimum, because that's the money that, or we're sort of conditioned to do that? And for a little bit more, do we get a lot more benefit? How do these ideas, where do they generate? Is this coming from the police themselves and going then to the selectmen? Because I don't know how the process comes.
Well-
Because your point is, hey, why don't we do this? But I don't think
Well,
this.
like, I
this
mean, I
seems right.
haven't been here super long, but I mean, my impression is there was a lot of frustration about the Boardman Rockwood intersection, people speeding down Rockwood, people trying to get across Boardman,
Yep.
and so,
I get it, and that's, my point is, we're sitting here in not only this meeting, but every meeting I've ever been in for the past 5 years before it, struggling over how are we funding all of these things. Well, here's a funding opportunity right in front of us, right? We will, if there's a police officer there, we'll have no qualms around issuing a citation and collect some revenue from a speeding ticket. If we're gonna invest in some automation or electronic detection of people speeding, like, why should that not be looked at as a revenue generating opportunity to help fill some of these gaps?
So I just checked.
Yeah,
So far, all photos such as red light and speed camera enforcement is still illegal in Massachusetts.
so that's.
The only exceptions are toll violations on the turnpike.
Because it's state dollars.
Yeah. Well, there goes that idea.
Right.
That's why it's really, really hard.
Well, that's for this idea, but in general, I mean, I think that, so what you would probably say, put words, use your words, is like, hey, we have this money, it's sort of already been, we have to use this money.
Yeah.
So let's push that issue down the road. But I'm very interested, as you are, it's like, okay, then, big picture, how do we think about these things on this issue, of course, but how do we think these things, and where do we get these ideas put through so that we're
We
Yeah,
have
more
residents who are
common.
looking for, gee, you should put up a traffic light. Well, traffic lights probably cost $250,000, and that's not including the design for the intersection, and that's not taking into consideration whether or not traffic laws, rules would allow would support actually having a light there. And so having to educate residents that I know you're playing traffic engineer, in your kitchen, but, and we appreciate that, but we may not be able to do what you think should be done. We may not be able to afford what you think should be done. So what measures can we take to at least let you know that you're going way too fast, so that hopefully you slow down and the person who's trying to get across Boardman actually can without getting hit. And we call the stadium people and say, hey, we need some help with traffic enforcement here. We can't do this all on our own. We can't afford it. And guess what? We've got 2 now officers and some more signage. Is it the perfect answer? No, it's not. But it's at least trying to address the situation.
Well, I think part of the question, and I hear what you're saying about citizens of the town give suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
Putting all of that aside, DPW, the police, I mean, do they have ideas? They share them with you, I assume?
They do, but and I wasn't here for the decision about this particular intersection of Boardman and Rockwood, but and I know that Freeman Kennedy was built with another driveway off of that intersection to hopefully get people to use it and free this up. I mean, that was thought about, which is great. But if it's not, if people are going too fast and people can't get out, then those signs that are going there to warn people of speed and cars approaching the intersection from the side, we hope is a low-cost, effective way to get people safely through it in a timely fashion.
I don't know if this rises to the same level as street spending, but just in terms of street improvements and maintenance. But I mean, to me, a presentation at some town meeting would be nice, just talking about, hey, from a traffic flow and safety perspective and whatnot, here are the intersections that we know are issues. Here are some suggestions that we have. This is where we're at. I mean, I know that everyone has their own spot. I forget the name, but like Main Street, as you head out this way, at some point you pass the graveyard, and there's those 2 stop signs. where
Needham and Seacon.
people are trying to like dart. Feels like people are gambling hardcore sometimes, jumping through there.
Driving distracted at the same time, I mean, you
Yeah.
add it all together and it's.
There's like flashing things on the stop signs as you come either way, and so obviously there's there's nothing that's perfect. I know that there are various calming lights and signs, and there's some things that can be done, but in any event, it might be helpful to just
Yeah.
understand what some of the department heads are going through and hear
Sure.
their thoughts.
Are we thinking of putting a roundabout there according to this presentation?
At the
Needham and-
other end of Needham and Route 15. That was one of the areas
Right.
identified
That's what I was.
in complete streets.
Right, but again, we've gotta be disciplined about putting money aside to design them so we can go after the money to build them.
Well, what I can add about like at least the flashing signs that tell you what the speed limit is, like I can tell you from the online message boards that people request them all the time, right? So I've seen people say, hey, can we get one over on Miller, which is where I live, and we got one on Miller for a week, and then they said, okay, we need to move it somewhere else now, we only have one. So I know that people have been requesting in town, and the idea of having more than one could be a positive thing. I think, my understanding is that there is some research that suggests reminding people what the speed limit is if they don't know because they're on a stretch where there's no sign, reminds them, even if they're not getting pulled over. So if we could maybe find that research or get a handle on that, that would be helpful to answer some of these questions. But my understanding is that there's a reason people do use them. It does something, either temporarily or permanently.
That's my understanding too.
Yep.
How much would be helpful? Perhaps if you could take that back and then maybe at the next meeting, let us know people's thoughts in terms of the research or thinking
Yeah.
or.
And I think the other thing people don't realize is you can go out and you can do a speed survey and determine what the average speed is. But if the average speed, if the road's posted for 30 and then the average speed ends up showing that people are driving
50.
35, guess what? You know, you're actually supposed to change it and it ends up backfiring of people hoping it's slower. That's careful what you wish for.
So we'll hold off on Article 4. Appreciate any context you can bring about the sign that we're talking about.
No,
This
Article
is
three.
it.
I'm sorry, 3, I'm getting switched.
Two
Thank
different
you.
signs.
Article
Two different
3.
signs. That was
Well,
confusing.
this article doesn't say we're buying a sign, it just says we're
So the motion
taking
would.
the money and
We have
allotting
the
it.
money, we
Yeah.
have to appropriate town meeting, the motion would say that we would use it to purchase transportation-related signage or something like that.
It does, it's not specific, we're not deciding town meeting what's being purchased, we're just allocating this or earmarking it to something.
Transportation.
But it still
related.
has to be it doesn't have to be decided by the vote in the town meeting, but in order to get the money, we have to decide how to use it.
Right, my point in saying that, I don't think we have to wait for voting on
I don't
this.
think you do
Yeah.
either, I think
Very
it's-
good.
I hear you.
we need to appropriate, we got the money in 17 and we didn't appropriate it, so now we're combining 17 and 18. And we'll do this in the future as the money comes in.
Great, I'm hearing eagerness around making a motion. Bring it.
Make a motion to vote on Article 3.
Second.
Okay, Article 3, any discussions or questions? Okay, we'll open it for a vote. All in favor of, how does it go again? It's, boy, half a year goes by. I guess we can just do yays and nays, right?
All in favor, yeah?
Correct. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so Article 3 passes unanimously.
You don't get to vote?
I'm sorry, I was thinking of IP, indefinitely postponed.
Right.
Right, but it's yays and nays, right, okay. Which brings us to Article 4.
Can I ask a question on number 4?
Please?
Sure.
Is the $10,000 state grant, is there some gotcha there, meaning we've gotta vote this in to match those funds in
Yes.
order to receive them?
Yes,
So it's either we put in the balance or we get nothing.
exactly. I mean, it's actually, we have to match it with 10,000, but according to the grant, we can use a portion of our expenses in the operating budget for the other 1,400.
Yeah.
But we have to come up with 8,600.
And is that grant specifically earmarked for this trailer mounted sign, or is it more?
Yes, it is.
open-ended?
We actually, within the eligible item, activities and equipment that the grant was available for, we made a play for this sign because, perfect example, if we had some type of an emergency and an area of town and we needed to let people know coming both directions that there was a problem, they had to go a different way, we only have one sign. There's been times when we've got issues different places and we have no way to put it out in a second place without compromising the first. So when the emergency management director told me that the competitive grant came out, we worked together with police and fire, wrote it, won it, and the only thing we're waiting for is our funding to match it.
Thank you.
Other questions on Article 4?
Gotta make a motion
Please do.
to vote on Article 4.
Please do.
I make a motion to vote on Article 4.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of Article 4, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The article passes unanimously. Which brings us to Article 5. Town HR classification and compensation plan update. I know we spoke last time about the consultative expertise that we're bringing in to make sure this is a win-win on both sides of the negotiating aisle. Any questions or discussions about Article 5.
Just one more question, because, and we talked about this at length last week, but is there, what are there are safeguards to make sure that somewhere down the line, we don't go, oh my gosh, now we've got all these people making too much money, or what are the safeguards to ensure that we're really reviewing and making sure that it's in line with market, so that.
So you start by reviewing and updating every job description that you have and making sure it's up to date with various laws, with actual requirements to do the work, the way the work is done, the essential functions. The consultant then uses a methodology to determine that the highest job in the organization is the town administrator and the lowest job is the entry-level data entry person, or.
So I'll be more specific. So who ensures that what the consultant is putting forward makes sense? Who's ultimately responsible?
It's gonna be the human resources director and myself.
Okay.
And so that plan, those systems use probably 14 different criteria to determine the amount of judgment initiative required to do a job, the amount of education required to do the job, the complexity of the job, so that you end up with a basic, administrative assistant data entry person at the bottom grade and whatever the top job in the organization with the most, Todd's job would be fairly highly rated because he's got a significant responsibility for financial affairs of the town, and the risk that if he doesn't do his job correctly is quite high.
Yeah.
So that's how that all works.
I just wanted to ask, who in the town was ultimately responsible? And it sounds like he was.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions about Article 5? Any motions?
Move to approve Article 5.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of Article 5, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. I voted aye. Article 6, we are,
Do you wanna wait until the selectmen have had a chance
yes,
to?
I have a big delay on that here.
They haven't had a chance to debate this at all, so.
I have my little triangle here which says changes.
The pavement thing?
Well, Cece had a double root canal yesterday afternoon, so she missed the meeting, poor person. And we didn't discuss adding a specific amount, and so I feel they deserve to at least have an opinion before we finalize it.
Root canal, she can't Skype from the dentist chair? Come on.
I think any person in that situation deserves to take some Advil and go home to bed.
I completely agree. I hope she feels better soon. Okay, Article 7, capital expenditures. So we had a lot of discussion on that.
Yeah.
Additional questions, motions? I know there was a change to the the police radios that we talked about. And what was the other change that you had discussed? There's two, I think.
Why does your comments read differently? My reading, did you change? Sorry, I
It's
apologize.
okay.
Yeah, it says nothing is anticipated and will be postponed.
Oh, and the warrant itself?
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that's just a copy and paste
None,
mistake.
we'll replace none with some.
That's why
Yeah,
I
that's
was
definitely
like,
a copy and paste.
I had moved on beyond that, and then we're like, whoa, we need to discuss it, and I was like, wait a minute.
I very much appreciate when lots of people read this, so I don't get to town meeting and go,
But we still we do list it, like in
Yeah.
the article, yeah.
No, we're actually voting on the list of stuff that's in here.
But are we showing it as part of the warrant?
don't print a booklet.
Yes.
Yes.
No,
Need to change
It's part of the
that
booklet.
recommendation needs to reflect what's on this list,
Just come,
which is the
That's
just
the
the
computers and the
end
mower
end
and
of this booklet.
radios and the police cruiser.
Where's the booklet if we don't print the warrant and mail it out to everybody?
you can take that off.
I'm just getting a history lesson.
So that when this goes to vote, we get to see what these items are, but the people,
Yes, they will, so they'll be on a PowerPoint up on the screen, and it will show all the revenues
Where the monies are coming from.
and exactly all the items on the list, just like you see them here.
perfect.
Will this, how far ahead of time will this be available to the public?
You could argue it's actually mostly available now because we started putting the selectmen's agenda packets on the website under their page, and so anyone who wants to can, I mean, they don't see all these columns because we just did this today,
Mhm.
but they saw this general piece of paper and all these items listed and the total cost of them.
But someone in the public would have to know to go to the select board.
Correct. I think we can put it out on the website.
Okay, I
close
think
to
that would be
town
very
meeting.
helpful for people.
Sure. Happy to.
Okay.
Motions? Questions?
Did you look at the list, John?
Yep.
Okay. I'll move to approve Article 6,
7?
7.
Sorry,
I
I
move.
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of Article 7, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Article 8, revolving fund. Now, in advisory board days of yore, I know people had strenuous objections about revolving funds. I don't know if Arlie's listening, but hello, Arlie. His spirit lives on. I never quite understood the concern, just that they didn't really collect much money, or why do we have, because we have a number of them.
Right.
I think a dozen, 20, I think total.
What do you think?
Less than a dozen, yeah.
Can someone describe
Plus-
what a revolving fund is? The
Absolutely.
viewers at home and myself.
So a revolving fund, basically you have user fees
Mhm.
associated with the fund, so those user fees go into the revolving fund.
Okay.
And then expenses come out of the revolving fund. At the annual town meeting, we vote for expenditure limits on those revolving funds each year, so if you anticipate your expenses from that fund to be 10,000, you vote a limit of 10,000, which just means you're not allowed to spend any more than 10,000 in that particular year from that particular fund. The idea is, the more revenues that you come in, field fees for recreation, they spend upwards, I think it's about $90,000 off the top of my head. So they have field fees come in, and then they use those monies to pay for fertilizing, upkeep of the fields, et cetera, things of that sort, sprinkler system, stuff like that. So the idea is monies are specifically for a particular cause. In this instance, you'd be voting for Council on Aging, and they're looking to have the monies that come in from those participants that are in the yoga or the feng shui or whatever they do over at the different programs over at the COA. Those monies would go in, and then they would use those monies to then pay the instructors from that program.
And then just the end of that is at the end of the year, if we go over, if they can't go over.
They can't go over.
They can't go over, so they go, no class today.
Well, they have to figure out what the appropriate amount is to charge for the class, so they can cover the cost, and those come and go out of that fund.
I can't remember if there's a if there's something, sometimes there's extra money, no?
Well, they can collect more for some reason, they
If
just
there's a
can't spend
balance in
more.
the account, that would continue on year to year.
I see, it just stays in
They're
the
only
fund.
maxed out, so let's say the expenses the first year, we anticipate $6,000. Well, the expenses the first year was not only $6,000, but probably maybe a little bit more. They just can't use that fund, because they've only been authorized to use 6,000 of that. They'd have to use either their budget or from the COA. They also get a grant from the state that they can use some of those monies for.
Why do we limit them? Like if they're just spending what they have,
State law.
is that right?
Yeah, it's
You
a,
have-
it's a
you have
section
to-
of state law, it's
you have-
chapter 53E and a half.
Ooh, that's good.
Numbers
But
of
if
half.
they started building up a surplus, then there would be reconsideration on maybe the cap is too low too, right?
And so that
Versus-
money that used to come in from the revenue can go into the general fund, so the general purpose of running the town now goes into this revolving fund. So some might not care for it because it's no longer available for
Available,
any
yeah.
purpose.
Yeah.
So only available for that particular purpose. So they need to write the purpose and define what they're gonna spend the money on and what revenue comes in to, to support it.
And if, if they went over 3 years in a row, $6,000 cap, if they went over 3 years in a row, then we would reconsider changing. And no one complained about the fees, which would be the balance to that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Then you'd consider raising it, so they could do a little more. But
If they're expanding their programs, they may need to expand what they can spend. But they're also gonna have to raise their revenue, raise the rates to pay for it, or
not hit it.
or not have the class.
But you don't have to have a revolving
No.
fund, you could just do this in and out of the general budget, correct?
Yep.
You could, correct.
Is there a benefit to having a revolving fund, just from a financial management perspective?
It doesn't matter to me, the revenues from, the way we're set up now, revenues go into the general fund, so it's not part of the COA budget. That, what we're trying to do is say, okay, this revolving account, those revenues would now go into this revolving account. You start to build up the revenues, but those revenues would be offset by the expenses
The
associated with
benefit of
the.
that being,
You could start to build it up, I mean, it's just, you're now identifying specifically, instead of having, because basically the revenues have to go to the general fund, you have to wait an entire year, free cash gets certified, it gets dumped in, spread amongst everything. The revenues are specifically going back to the COA.
without you having to just keep track on the side.
Right.
Correct.
And right now, they're paying for some of their instructors out of the state formula grant that they receive. They may still have to do that to start, but, overall, the goal is to have the programs running themselves in terms of revenue and expenses, be able to identify that in the fund and use that formula grant for other things that can benefit the senior population.
And further down the road, maybe we can adjust their budgeted balances on the general fund side, reduce those potentially because they have enough funds coming in to manage the expenses all within the revolving fund.
And from your perspective, the amount of spending that this would represent warrants it? I mean, if something was like $5, and that's all you're getting every year, it's probably, just to use an extreme example,
Yep.
it's probably too much overhead to worry
Correct.
about. But
Yep.
this represents a substantial enough activity in your regard to be a benefit for this.
And I'd like to see the formula grant go to things that benefit the larger population rather than people taking programs, because that's only supporting the people taking the program, not the more general
Okay.
activities that can help and support the larger senior community.
So the way they're currently structured, they could go into a deficit, right? Or could they not?
They could not.
Okay,
They
so
could not.
either way, this is just.
They can't.
This is just segregating the money.
It's about the only place we can go into a deficit is snow and ice.
Snow and ice,
Yeah.
right. Okay. So the $6,000, is that coming from, so is that money that was identified that really belonged to them to start with, or are we it's like a seed fund from?
It's not. There's
Okay.
that's the spending minimum.
That's just a cap.
Okay,
So there's no dollars actually going into the fund.
got it, okay.
The fund will be established, the revolving fund will be established,
Mhm.
and then any revenues from that point forward would then be deposited into the fund, but they would only be capped at the expenses for the year,
Got it.
$6,000.
Okay.
It's like an accounting / financial control mechanism, which is
So,
why I'm
great.
asking.
In essence,
Thank you.
if they received $8,000 in revenues, that $2,000 would carry over to next year. We'd have to vote on the new limit for them, whether we raise it or keep it 6,000, would have to be identified depending on what their needs are.
Great.
Have we ever raised the limit? I don't,
On occasion, we adjust a couple of them.
I'm
I
trying to
think the
remember.
director is looking at what she thinks she's gonna do in terms of programming and what that might cost and what she's gonna take in for it, and that's how she came up with a figure.
Fair enough.
Okay, any additional discussion about revolving funds, Article 8?
Nope. I move to vote on Article 8.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on Article 8? If no, everyone in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. 8 passes unanimously. Article 9. Oh, post-employment, oh goodness.
Gosh, yeah. You said that so like,
We were moving along so briskly, and, well, I mean, yeah, so there was a brisk discussion, and lively discussion at the last meeting regarding the extremely large obligation that the town has accrued, and how Blythe is interested in just doing something, putting an amount in, albeit small, to raise discussion and to get something started.
Yes, so I just one thing I wanted to add is the selectmen established the trust fund itself, the actual vehicle.
Legal entity.
entity, thank you, in April.
Okay.
So I, can't answer why that didn't happen sooner, but doesn't really matter. So this would be the first step towards starting deposit and that board being able to start to work. Okay, not gonna get far in 25 grand, but starting to talk about investing those funds and over time growing them to help.
There was some contrary opinion discussed at the last meeting about, well, there's other ways to fund this, isn't this simply a token? Why even go here, because we'll never get to where we need to go through drips and drops like that, I believe was the essence of concerns at the last meeting. Again, on the opposite side of it, we're doing something for the first time and it's raising awareness, so.
But there was another reason to do something, right? There's another benefit in that match. It allowed us to do something else.
It helps with financial ratings, to show that you're making an effort to address this situation.
Don't you have to get a certain deposit level, or is it just anything? in the
Not yet,
appreciate?
but I think that's coming someday.
Okay. Okay.
And to be able, it's much better, to Todd's point, to say, what serious steps have you taken? We've established a fund, we've started
I
a
see.
funding schedule, we
Good
know
faith effort.
we know it's not adequate, but we are committed to working on it, or what the rating agencies want to hear.
And the size of the obligation that we discussed last time?
21 million?
May I ask a question?
The
Sorry,
the $21 million question, yes, please.
I missed last week, so I apologize if this is redundant.
No.
The 134 retirees are currently receiving health benefits today,
Mm-hmm,
so they're paying their 50% in.
mm-hmm.
Where's that money in the budget? Where does that go?
Goes into the health insurance costs,
Okay.
to offset.
So if we have to pay something out, I guess, since we haven't, we're currently paying
We're
the
paying
other
as we go
50%
now.
as we go. So I guess the question I have is I understand from the projections, right, long-term, there's this $21 million number, but what's the shortfall right now? Like, where's the gap today on this? If the employees are funding their 50% and we're funding the other 50%, is this not fully funded today for this fiscal
State
year?
law says that there has to be a fund. Is that what I understood?
No, we have to, the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, makes us report this liability. We have to do a actuarial evaluation every other year.
Yes, we outsource the actuarial evaluation, and they go through, take all of our current employees, our retired employees, our healthcare programs, all the different plans that are available, who's in what plan, and then they run all those numbers. And they've identified, based on the numbers, our exposure liability is $21 million. And in order to.
In the future.
Well, yes, so today we're budgeting, within the operating budget, we're covering the 134 people that have retired, whether they're still on the regular plan or they are post-65 and on a Medigap plan, and all the regular employees we have. But where it starts to get more difficult is, as I've been picking on Chief Stone because he's been here up with the town a long time. He retires and we hire a new police chief, then we're covering him and we're covering the new police chief. And so as our employees who are eligible retire, the numbers start to grow significantly, and the medical trend is factored in 5% a year or whatever it is.
Right, so I guess that's what I'm trying to understand though, is we are projected to have this $21 million gap at some point in the future,
Mhm.
but today it's fully
Isn't it
funded
operating?
for today?
But for today it is, we're
Right,
meeting
well,
our
this-
obligation.
Got it, so my question is, where does that gap start? How far away are we? Is this next year? Is this in 5 years?
I
Like when?
guess, I don't know when we have a significant number of people retiring, if there's
I don't know the date off the top of my head. I can get you the full report.
So we could have a gap like tomorrow, or it could be in 10 years.
I think it's gonna
Not
get,
sure.
just gonna get increasingly challenging to balance a budget when you're having to take care of this many more people as I retire and someone comes on, Sue retires and someone comes on. And we need to take other steps. We need to try to find ways to reduce our healthcare costs if we can. That will help mitigate that. I think there needs to be some more push to the state level to say this is an unsustainable cost for any community. Our residents don't necessarily have this benefit, so should state law change, so employees, retirees, enjoy that benefit in the future. That will help
So on the
reduce the
budget,
cost.
if that number gets super big and it dominates our budget,
Right.
that's what the fund
And that,
is.
I mean, it limits, I think the bond rating comment that was made earlier gets at a lot of this, is that it sucks up our ability to do other things.
It does.
So if we have this trust established, which we do, and we start putting money in, is there a way to claw that money back out if
No.
projections turn out to be way off, or people move away or die or aren't consuming the health insurance and the,
I can't
In the measure?
imagine how far behind we are that we'll get to that we'd ever get to that point. I mean, I think the benefit would have to be completely removed, under
well,
state
that's,
law.
that's, I guess, part of the question is one of the things you mentioned is, hey, this may become unsustainable, state law may change, who knows what may happen in the future. If we're putting money into a trust that there's no provision to claw it back, my question is, what happens when we have $21 million in this fund and we don't need it for its stated purpose?
I think if that happened in the state, there'd be 350 other communities with the same question about changing the ability to take money back out of that fund, but I can't imagine us getting there. In frankly, a very pro-labor state, it's gonna be very difficult. Previous Governor Patrick tried to get legislation changed and it failed. And there hasn't been interest in the state since to address the problem.
So it doesn't make sense for us to put in $21 million.
Right.
But we're gonna spend, barring the zombie apocalypse or whatever, we're gonna spend the money. So it has, to take advantage of, but we can afford to put some in now, and hopefully that grows, it gets invested.
Do we have a buyout provision, meaning we would offer retirees cash in lieu of taking health insurance?
I just
working
met
on
with the unions last week to put that on the table as a voluntary program. That's another strategy that I've used in other places and I think could work here. I think it may not work as well as some of the other communities because we already require employees, full-time employees, to pay 35% of their insurance, which may be low compared to the private sector, but it's on the higher side in the public sector. And I think that what that means is employees who already have, say, a spouse working may have already opted out to buy their insurance to their spouse, and we're not covering them today. So typically, if you offer a buyout, you don't offer much of anything for the folks who've already self-selected out, because that works against you. So I think I ran some numbers. If 10% of all of our employees today opted out, we'd save $130,000 a year. And if we could port a portion of that towards this, liability, that would be great. I don't know that we get 10% given many people have already chosen not to buy it here. So I'm definitely trying to work on that, but I don't know what the results are gonna be yet. I would like to have something in place for budget year next year.
One more question. So the trust has been established. Who are the trustees? Do we know?
We have selectmen, chair, which probably needs to be changed because it's now Arthur, town administrator, myself, and the treasurer.
I'm the chair of the trust.
$21 million.
You're on the, you're
You're
the
part of
chair
the
of this
board.
committee, so you're on the trust.
Congratulations.
Do I have to get my wallet out now?
No. And
not
no
that bad.
requirements of trustees to make personal contributions, none whatsoever.
Well, I'm glad this came up.
I mean, Jonathan, it's a good question because Jackie raised this last week, like what happens if on the national level, healthcare policy changes to some other type of, avenue for people that have Medicare or whatever. What does this do to programs like this? And if,
Well, I mean, so in my last community, we were in a different health group, and that group decided to move forward with high deductible plans. And we structured that program in such a way that we incentivized people to jump onto that plan. It was huge because we thought maybe in the town of Wellesley, we thought maybe 50 people out of 2,000 might take this plan. Well, actually, 250 people took it.
Goodness.
And the town saved $1 million. Not only did they save $1 million in their next budget year, but the overall cost of the plan came down, so the numbers that drive you towards your ultimate liability went down. And happy employees all have health insurance, and that the town's liability was reduced. That was the kind of things we have to try and work on.
Yeah, I think it's a risk management question, and there's some curve, I think, that a lot of us are imagining in our minds, and we would like to make progress towards the curve. Perhaps there's a law of diminishing returns in terms of how far we go all in, and then other risks that might occur. Any context in the future you can bring about what that curve might look like, or, when the certain percentage of projected increase starts consuming a disproportionate or a concerning amount of the budget, that would be good to know. 1 year, 5 years, I think a lot of this is a question of magnitude and speed.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, working on these various options to get it reduced is absolutely what I want to see us do.
How is this getting managed at the meeting?
Huh?
How does this get presented at the meeting?
I haven't figured that one out yet. I mean, I mean, part of me would say just put it in another, stick it in number 7 and just, but I think it's important. It's important for people to understand, and I don't want to be the Grim Reaper here, but.
I think, like, as you said earlier, awareness is an important part of this, and if it's buried in 7, that doesn't.
Some towns, I think I mentioned last week, some towns have taken the money that they receive from the restaurant meals tax, and they dedicate that. That's a strategy, but those things all take some conversation, some discipline to say, we're gonna carve out that revenue stream and put it over here.
But I think, talking about it in the sense that this is gonna show up in either general operating or here, and this is just us segregating and being able to invest it and potentially make some returns while we're,
And
well, we have
start
do it
to
anyway.
start to dig into that liability.
Right.
Or improve our financial rating, which,
Yeah.
decreases our cost of borrowing.
Yep.
And again, the trustees are the selectmen, the chair of this board.
One selectman, I think there are 5. One, you and I, the treasurer.
Treasurer and the chair. of the
Advisory chair.
board.
Okay.
There's no employee rep?
Well, you could argue we are.
I wouldn't argue that, your management.
It's in the contracts.
I'm being a devil's advocate.
Okay.
Thank you for all the information. Bringing us back to the article at hand, Article 9, any further discussion or questions about just the article? We've had a lot of chat about long-term consequences, but let's focus in on this amount. 25,000. Any motions?
I'm just wondering if it would be an appropriate thing to do to delay it, to see if Sue can come to the next meeting. Klein.
Well, she's already made her opinion clear on where she's gonna vote, which is nay, so I think she made that very clear last week.
Yes,
Get the
yes, she
same?
did. Yes, she did.
But
But how does that work, like if she's not,
She's
She
not-
doesn't get to vote.
Right.
Right,
I'm
but she,
simply-
she can certainly speak to it at the,
Right.
at the town meeting and
Right.
say that she was not in favor of it, but,
Speaking of which, for this reason and many others, it's helpful to understand when people can come or not. I could say, let's postpone this, and then I would ask,
No, I
Susan,
understand.
do you-
That's why I asked. I didn't sort of require or request.
and-
no, I understand, but I'm not sure that she'll be at the next meeting is my
No, I
point,
understand.
because we don't, do
well,
we know?
she just emailed at 10 minutes of 5 and said she couldn't make it,
Yeah.
so.
Got it.
And Todd, would you send everyone the report so everyone can, it's not quite bedtime reading, but.
Well, I'm very
having trouble
interested.
sleeping, so it might be.
I watched that 2-hour planning board meeting a couple days
Surprise.
ago, so be surprised that we find to be bedtime reading.
If the will is that's best to
No,
wait till
I'm
next
not,
week, that's fine.
I was asking.
If others would prefer that too, that's completely fine, we have time. Let's hold off until next week.
I mean, I won't be here next week, but I'm in favor of it, so, for the record.
I think we have plenty of people on the pro category,
Yeah.
at least I think.
I was planning on voting for it. I was simply paying a courtesy
Right.
to the vote.
Understood, which I think we're able to do. So we'll delay on Article 9, Article 10, Water Enterprise Fund. Nice and non-controversial, I always love water articles. Any discussion? Again, this is all out of the enterprise fund dedicated to this
Mm-hmm.
spending.
I asked a question last week that was partially answered, but it needs to be extended by 1,500 feet from the well to Myrtle. That was my question, was where is the extension going? I don't need to
where
know.
does the
I don't
main
need.
end?
I don't need to know.
I will find out.
We can vote
Thank
on
you.
it, but I'm just wondering if there's gonna be local opposition because someone's gonna be tearing up the roads.
I live near Myrtle, I wanna know.
I'm happy to vote on it, but I think it's something to keep in mind, so. I don't live near
I
there,
can text
so.
Bob right now, see if I can get an answer.
No, that's fine. I'll even make a motion if there,
You know how much I love that.
I'd move to approve Article 10.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve Article 10. Any additional discussion? All in favor of Article 10, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay? I'm an aye on that. It passes unanimously. Bring us to, I believe Article 11 is just the reports, so we can skip that.
I'm not aware of any reports. at this
Article
point.
8,
Yes, that was unanimous.
and there's a lot of talk about that, so who made the motion?
For, this is the age of
Just a
revolving fund.
revolving fund question.
Yeah, I could.
Is it
Okay,
you, Lee?
No, no,
Okay.
and who seconded?
Jonathan.
Jonathan, thank you.
Or maybe Kristen.
Remember? It's like 10 minutes
Are
ago.
there any presentations we should know about, or anything exciting happening?
Not that I'm aware of yet.
Has no
Okay.
committee
We don't
passed.
typically get a lot of committees in the fall.
Yeah, I know it's usually.
Town government study might be.
So if I could speak to the CPC articles, I spoke with Cindy, yesterday.
Okay,
And she asked if we wanted her to come in and speak to any of the articles. I told her that because this year was being done a little differently, where the selectmen were bringing everybody in, we were kind of gonna be hearing the information from Blythe. But she wanted to reinforce that if we felt like we needed her for anything. You know, I know we discussed the fields pretty in-depth last time. We discussed the weed control. You know, that's kind of been on our table for a couple of town meetings now.
it has.
And then the $500 transfer was minimal. And then the repairing, resetting, and cleaning of 40 headstones. So I told her,
That was gonna be my question. They've identified the 40 headstones they want to,
it says approximately 40 headstones.
but you think they have a sense of what those are?
I think that they
Right.
do, because they've asked for a specific amount to
Okay.
do a specific number.
All right.
May it differ by one or two? It may, but I think it'll be very, very close.
These are all Community Preservation Committee funds, so they're designated for these purposes. We can't use it for anything else. Any questions? Let's start with the headstones. Any questions on that? Additional questions? Will entertain a motion?
I move to approve Article 12.
I say,
Okay, any further discussion about Article 12? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. I'm an aye on that. It's ready to vote. It passes unanimously, bringing us to the display case. Again, not a large item. Motions.
I motion to vote on 13.
Second.
Any additional discussion? If not, all in favor of Article 13, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. I was an aye on that. Article 14, which gets to our weed control. I know there was, I think, some discussion of the decision to purchase equipment and invest in that versus continuing to rent. I believe our DPW had concerns about making an investment, giving maintenance and storage and whatnot, I think is how that line of thinking went.
That did, and Barbara Bartholomew did an awesome job. I almost wanted to offer her a job, of thinking through a 5-year lease purchase and working with other towns and storing it and all that. The only problem was we were not able to pull together a group of interested towns, and I had to help her understand that we couldn't just go out and do this and hope it worked out later. So she was very disappointed, but we got still some of the work done they want to do this spring, and now they want to continue it. So here we are.
Also, just for the record, I made a presentation to the selectmen on this, I think not once but twice, and I'm directly affected with this, so I will abstain. But I will still call the motion or ask any questions. Dave, do you have a question?
The money that we appropriated at Springtown meeting came out of the CPC as well?
No.
No.
That was
a
actually a general
transfer.
fund.
That's
was-
then my follow-up question. This is an eligible CPC cost, because I thought is this considered open space for the purposes of the CPC?
Yes,
Okay, both of them?
yes.
I know they made the initial investment in buying this is where it came from, so it sounds like maintenance counts.
Yeah, and I know this question's been tested in other communities
It
and
has.
found to be
All right.
acceptable.
I was on the CPC before they expanded the
Yeah,
eligible costs, so.
yeah.
Can I ask a question about CPC? So if we choose to to not be in favor of something on here, what happens? That fund just goes back into the fund for use
Stays
somewhere
in the fund.
else?
Yep.
Do we know, is there an amount in this fund that we're working with on a regular basis?
It
Todd, you're up.
accrues.
Okay.
So they have we call them buckets,
Mhm.
4 buckets. Affordable housing,
Mhm.
historic,
Mhm.
Open space.
Open space.
open space, and recreation.
Okay.
Well, open
Is
space and
recreation
recreation
its
are
own
one
bucket
bucket.
though?
Is one bucket.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then undesignated.
so it's pretty, their rules are
What's the-
pretty,
What's the balance right now?
Close to $3 million.
Okay.
Some buckets we have an easier time
And-
spending out of
I
than
mean,
others.
yes.
Conceptually,
historic,
the
we have
reason you
the
build
hardest
up the
time.
balance is in case a large piece of open space, for instance, comes available and you could buy it outright.
Mhm.
The flip,
Each year, 1% of our taxes goes towards the community preservation. Of that 1%, 10% gets allocated to those 3 buckets.
Okay.
70% goes into the undesignated.
And the state matches the 1%, not as much as they had originally hoped to, that you can either tax yourself at 1, 2, or 3%.
Mhm.
We're a 1% community, so we get less than the state, but that's what the town felt comfortable doing.
Mhm.
We
used to
were
be
3.
We used to be 3, we brought
We
it
voted.
down.
And
Oh,
they
really?
voted at town
Okay.
It was
meeting
a very
to
interesting
reduce
debate.
I'll bet it
Oh, yes,
was. But I
Okay,
mean, we
so
have
for
some
that.
future recreation, if we get the land from the state, we wanna expand Pond Street,
Mhm.
that's something that you could use a large amount for. One of the towns I worked for saved up their money and spent it to, borrow the money to completely rehabilitate their historic town hall. And paid for that over 20 years out of that revenue stream.
And just on a side note, as my affordable housing director
Mhm.
job, they've been very generous to the Affordable Housing Trust in helping, in assisting us in being able to purchase properties by giving us
Right.
far more than the 10%.
So I think my question is, if someone at town meeting were to say, okay, I think we should spend, line 14 or 15, would someone say that generally because they think it should be going towards something else?
Those debates used to happen, especially in the early years of the CPC, and amongst the membership of the CPC, but that has sort of settled down as the fund's gotten bigger. And about 8 or 9 years ago, the state opened up the usage. It used to be very strictly limited to affordable housing, required affordable housing, required open space, but not recreation, and required historic. And we don't have a whole lot of historic resources in town, so that was sort of chronically underspent, and recreation was chronically felt that they were getting shortchanged. When they opened it up a little bit, it eased that debate a lot at town meeting and at the CPC level.
I guess I'm wondering if someone might say, well, how about we spend that 40K or 90, K to put more into affordable housing and fight 40B, right? That's something.
They did it we gave them money in the spring.
Right.
Right, but it's, the affordable housing use really wouldn't be to fight, it's for us to go out and create affordable
Right.
housing. It's not for us to pay legal fees to try to stop a 40B.
Right. I mean, in terms of purchasing units and then making them affordable, right?
Right, so, and they have done,
Mhm.
that, but, we don't really get much debate on, I think to Dave's point, on CPC articles. People, I think, have the general gist now on,
Right.
Yeah.
okay, they help here, they help here. They have made some open space purchases,
Right.
not obviously as many as they because they'd like to,
Mhm.
because you can't buy everything.
Mhm.
But we don't, would you agree, Todd, Dave,
Also,
people?
since the rate went down from 3% to 1%, that helped.
Right.
The opposition to a lot of this stuff.
I think, so it seems like people are generally giving benefit of the doubt that if it's being asked for, it's something that's important and.
They've
Right.
seen some of the benefits.
Okay.
And
Great.
They'll usually come up at town meeting and say, hello, we've identified this one or these two opportunities, they explain it, here's how much we have in the bank account, this is how much this will cost, this is why we think that it's a really good opportunity. There's some questions, but not many.
Great, thank you for the context.
Yes,
Can I ask a question about weeds?
are you going
Sure.
to dive into the weeds?
What
Is
kinds?
that,
Since this
Okay, this
affects
is
you,
not the
maybe-
town meeting from 2 years ago.
I know a lot about water chestnuts, so
Since
yes,
this affects
please.
you, maybe you can answer.
Sure,
I don't, prior to last spring, I don't ever remember hearing about water chestnut weeds.
yep.
Is this a new phenomenon?
Well, it's,
Why weeds now?
they've expanded and grown over time, so, and this isn't just us, it's a regional issue. What'll happen is boats, geese, things will take a pod from one location, they'll drop it off in another,
Yeah.
and then they grow and they multiply and they multiply. It has now gotten to the point where it's covering a substantial portion of a variety of the lakes. When I say substantial, I don't know, maybe a quarter, maybe a third. So,
The reason I'm asking is I've lived in this town for 20 years and I've never heard about the weeds problem, and I've never heard about chestnut weeds prior to living here either. So clearly there's some environmental changes afoot that are contributing towards this explosion of weeds.
it's an invasive species.
So where I'm going with this is, are we solving the problem, or are we putting a Band-Aid on this?
We're-
Because we're spending $20,000 last spring to remove some weeds. That apparently wasn't enough. There's another $20,000 to remove some more weeds. Are we gonna be back here in the spring with $20,000 to remove weeds? Should we
I
be,
think you need to,
should
The
we be
answer is-
looking at the source of the issue and means to try and mitigate the spread of this and solve it from the source, rather than just continually fight the symptoms?
Okay, so.
Not saying that we don't
No,
need to
no, no,
remove
no,
weeds, but.
I completely understand the question. So the issue is that they lay dormant. So every July-ish, the weeds will then drop all their seed pods. And each seed pod makes dozens of more seed pods. So the idea is you have to do a control over a certain span of years. I think it's like roughly about 5. Because you have to, if we got every weed that's floating on the surface right now, that's just the ones that are producing now. There's still investments from years past of seeds that have dropped. So it's sort of a multi-year exponential problem, and you have to do this type of removal over a sustained period. The only way to try to prevent the seed pods from coming to begin with is it's some town boat launches, they'll say, make sure and wash your boat. That's because of the spread of invasive species. I don't know if they can do anything about the ducks and the geese and such, because they're very sharp barbs, they'll stick on their fur. The idea though is, I think once you get ahead of it, then it's much easier to manage. I believe some places like Lake Champlain, they'll never get ahead of it. And if it's gone unaddressed like this, it'll kind of sort of transform the entire lake. It would make it sort of all
Chokes
choked
it.
up. It turns the whole thing into sort of a swamp.
and you can, once you've done some of the actual weed, after some of the weed removal, you can also deploy, it's not necessarily a chemical, but you can use treatments to keep it at bay once you've dealt with
It's a
it.
multi-year effort.
Yeah,
is the
it's
short answer.
So I guess my
aquatic
question
weed
is,
control.
should we be planning and funding this as a multi-year effort instead of surprising people at every town meeting of, hey, now we need another
should.
20K?
But I mean, there's lots of things we should be doing. Our street signs are no longer in compliance with state law. They all need to be replaced. There's lots of things we need to be working on. I think we have to figure out what the priorities are and work
That was
towards.
part of the impetus behind let's invest in some kind of mechanical harvester, because it is a multi-year problem, but there's other considerations that made that not practical. But this was presented, as the presenter, we did make it clear to the selectmen, this is gonna take at least a 3-year, perhaps 5, repeated investment.
These are both town ponds,
Yeah.
town-owned ponds.
So I-
Yeah,
I,
town
well,
investment.
a couple of things. The Lawrence Street Pond, the north end of it is gone. It used to be a pond when I moved to town. It's now a swamp because of water chestnuts. And it's probably not recoverable. I think the stuff on the south shore of Rentham is potentially recoverable. And I know there was some discussion with the 40B proponent that they might take that on as part of a project. It never happened. I am part of a homeowners association that owns most of a pond. We used to manage it on a 3 or 4 year basis with limited chemical treatments. We've been prohibited from doing that by the Conservation Commission, and we can't afford mechanical hirings, so we're saying goodbye to my pond.
Well, I'm not debating that
Oh, sure.
there's 1,000,001 other things that we should be planning for too, but I mean, forgive me, I don't think that's a reason of why we're not planning for this one.
Oh, I get
Right,
that.
I'm just saying, so now this is the second town meeting where we've seen it, I think, I would expect that people, see, again, I agree with the people generally give CPC things a kind of a free pass, so to speak, but I think if we portray this as, hey, we didn't do enough last time, we need another $20,000, I would go out on a limb and guess that there will be some feelings of, oh, another ill-fated, unplanned, short-sighted money spend, because now you're gonna come back next time and ask for more and more and more, as opposed to something that is a little more upfront of, this is, I'm not saying we don't ask for this money or allocate this money now, but I think this needs to be presented in the form of, this will take, here's the bigger impact, this will take a multi-year investment. We do need to actually think about it from a multi-year investment and start planning for that now, because I think people will start to get frustrated every 6 months with another 20K. It's just gonna be perceived as it's not being well planned, and we're
Well,
just
I
throwing
like it.
money
Yeah.
at the.
And I believe that's how it was presented. Last year, we wanted to take action even though we were out of the budget cycle,
Yeah.
which is why the idea was if they did this through capital, I think it was, and then next year it could go into the regular budget. So that's my recollection of how it was presented. The
Okay.
selectmen's meeting was online where the presentation was made. So I think it's always been portrayed as a multi-year effort. If that question comes up, we should be clear about that.
And I'd like to get into the, if not in the operating budget, in the capital budget, and say we've gotta continue to focus on this. Maybe the funding source is CPC, and that's helpful, but, you know, or maybe we do figure out a regional approach that can make it more sustainable.
Something that's also probably worth mentioning is the local community, myself included, went out in boats, so we very much tried to handle this through just
Oh, I heard you guys
volunteers.
did a great job.
Well, scratch the surface. It's a lot of work, and we just realized after one summer's worth of several weekends, this is just far above our
I
heads.
just says, what's the right figure, cause the warrant says 40,000 and this write-up, or the detail says 20,000.
I believe it's 40.
Mine says 40, hold on.
Maybe I-
Looking around?
Yeah, it says 40.
Mine says 40.
But
This
no, in my
page-
back, in this,
This document says.
sorry,
40.
I may have had that
The
mistake.
warrant itself,
The
No.
warrant itself
No.
says 40.
Right, this is the document he's referring to,
Summary
Blythe, is your summary
Yeah,
document.
I may have made a mistake there.
Okay, all right, so I'm looking now in the warrant, it does say 35 years, so that's good, okay. I was more
but to your
reading
point,
it
it's something
as-
to emphasize,
Yeah.
just to make it clear, because I don't think there was that much discussion about it, went by pretty quickly.
There wasn't.
So
I recall.
those are good points to hit.
What's the town entity agency that's responsible for?
DPW,
Shouldn't it be the Conservation Commission? Don't they sort of?
oh,
Well, you had to go to conservation to get a permit to
Yes.
do
No,
the
but don't
work.
they also manage our open space theoretically, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, I mean,
when I approached
DPW,
them last year, I mean, they have to authorize it, but
DPW supported the effort this summer by, because they had, I think, 40 truckloads of weeds that once the stuff came out of the pond, they had to dump it onto the ground, let some water out, put it into a truck, haul it away. And that took a lot of work on our part to support that
it was
effort.
appreciated.
Yeah,
I mean, the Conservation Commission was willing to endorse the citizen group, whatever we wanted to do, just let them know, or when DPW brought in the contractor last year, I think they see themselves as being more just like an oversight approver.
Is City Mills also the area where they're replacing the bridge? They'll be replacing a bridge?
Lawrence Street we replaced.
There was a
You mean
different
City
part.
Mills
City
Bridge?
Mills is the
Yeah.
one by the paint company.
Right, I thought there was another plan that's not on here, obviously, to replace that bridge, or replace that
It does need to be
overpass.
replaced at some point. I actually need to write a letter of support. There's legislation at the state to get the state to take the bridge over, which would
Right.
be huge. Try to get that through the state so that somebody else's financial problem rather than ours. It does need, there
I
has
remember
been some work
DPW
done on
director
it.
saying that that was basically crumbling underneath.
Yeah,
and
it is.
delays. Okay.
Thank you.
So I think it's
Okay,
worth noting that there is a plan to invest in that area of town, and so this would be somewhat consistent with that,
Yep,
with
good
that
point.
thinking.
Yeah,
So regarding Article 14, I'm just realizing that because I was an advocate for this earlier and I'm abstaining, the max we could get is 4 votes, which means that's not a quorum, so we will need to postpone this until next time. Gotta love procedures. Postpone. Okay. Well, actually, if, say, 3 people vote for something and 2 people vote against, something doesn't have to get 5 votes, right?
nope.
No, but I would not suggest voting it without a quorum on that particular.
So the abstention is not a vote, it's me not being present for that vote or some such thing? I'm dequoruming for that one vote?
I would, yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I would just like to
You
cover
could-
all
you
of our
could vote-
bases.
You could vote no and then cross fingers that everyone else will vote yes.
Right,
I would,
And then that way, that won't be held against you as a.
yeah, I think
Are
the
you
best.
kidding? I have to go back to my neighbors having voted no?
I could
You've
make it
got
have
to
to
be
say
kidding
it's
me.
not unanimous.
I think we should wait.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we got another.
We need to wait until we have a
Thank
quorum.
Thank you.
Just throwing it out.
I appreciate the creativity, thank you. Yes, out there in the woods, if something happens, nobody will know. All righty, Article 15, athletic field restoration. The largest of the proposed spending. Mr. Alfie?
May I make a comment?
Please.
My only comment on this is the timing. The weather's not gonna cooperate, and these won't be ready by baseball season, especially all 3 of them. And, I am in favor of this, but I think the timing would be better suited to do it after the conclusion of next baseball season rather than trying to cram it in between the weather. Because every year, baseball will start, and baseball is always delayed by the weather as it is. So if the weather is uncooperative, where the fields haven't been opened and they're too wet, like, I don't see how the renovation of 3 fields would successfully be completed prior to the start. I think this is just completely unrealistic expectations on timing. And my fear is if they start it and get halfway done, it will impact the ability to start the season on all these fields. So I'm in favor of allocating funds, but I think this needs to be, the timetable needs to be looked at until after the conclusion of the season rather than prior to the
Is this a
start.
question to be taken away and brought back next time? or-
I would defer to completely to recreation. I don't have a lot of background on this one. I sat through the CPC meeting where they discussed it, but I'm not, as the one who's not gonna carry it out, I got,
Understood. So
So I
we'll,
can ask Ann to come in.
okay, to
in
the next
photo.
meeting, that would be really helpful. We can put her first. and-
Okay,
yeah.
Does this
I mean-
necessitate a certain time period by voting on it now?
it has to be spent by June 30th,
Okay,
right?
right.
We can, CPC things can go cross fiscal years, can't they? Yeah, so I mean, if it didn't, it could, if they got one field done, they had to wait on the other 2. Financially,
Although the
there's not
cost could
a,
go up because sometimes you get,
that's
getting the
a
crew out there,
possibility,
so it could
sure.
raise the cost by not doing it all at once.
It could.
Some context would be helpful.
Yeah, I would still defer to Ann. I just don't have those answers for you.
We would love to hear from her, and again, happy to put her first.
okay, I will reach out.
So it's a short,
Yeah, so it's
short
a quick,
visit for
a
her.
quick visit.
Thank you.
Not to belabor it, but if we're concerned about like grass growing season, like we've missed it for the fall, and if it's supposed to be completed by April, we're gonna miss it by, or not get there by April. I just don't see the feasibility of this in this timeframe.
Okay, so we are just past 8:30, I think we're doing very, very well, and are on Article 16, which gets us into bylaws. Okay, 16, amend or deleting the strike-through language.
No more Girl Scout cookies or,
They're not selling it to the town, they're selling it to the town employees, right?
no, it's town employees prohibited from selling materials
To the town.
to the town.
So if the selectmen voted to buy Girl Scout cookies, that would be a problem.
I'd say no.
Okay, but we can still sell ours. We can still sell our goods.
That's what I'm getting.
I'm out of that
So am I.
business, Dave, but I'd like to still be able to help those that are in it.
That first language didn't exist?
Which one?
Section 1, or it must exist now,
It
right?
exists now.
The only thing that, okay.
So section 3 is changing, is going away. Section 4 becomes 3, and 5 becomes 4.
Right.
I think
Can
you
I ask a
mentioned at the
question?
last meeting that the bid procedures about lock and key are antiquated beyond.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, we're not following
Last
them now,
century.
so.
Technology has totally changed. State law came into effect in 1989 that changed how we handle bidding. It's just
Antiquated.
antiquated.
3/16/36, that's,
That was when that was put in the bylaws.
1936?
1936.
Okay. Not something you see very, very often. 1936,
Yeah, I
very
didn't
nice.
know what those numbers meant.
Yeah, that was when it
Yeah.
was enacted into bylaws.
May I ask sort of a personnel question about this? At one point, I know that the town manager or the town administrator was our procurement officer. Is the finance director our current procurement officer, or is it someone else?
Dum, dum, dum. Cameras on.
I'm not sure who is assigned at the state level. I have to find out.
Okay.
But it's a
Shouldn't-
fun
shouldn't-
course.
I was gonna, have you taken it?
I am
Yeah, we all,
yes.
lots of
Well,
us
then you
have.
should be. That's the reason I asked the question, was to find out if you were certified
I'm not
procurement
sure
officer.
if our bylaws dictate who needs to be.
I didn't think it is. I think that Jack at the time was the only person who had gone through the course, because he started as the finance director before he became.
Oh, that's right, it did, yeah, that's right.
So I just wanted to make sure that our finance director was a certified
I
procurement
am a
officer.
certified.
That's what I wanted to know.
Fully certified.
Thank you very much.
The whole program.
Then I'm fully in favor of this update. As long as you build it into the new job description, that it has to be, that the finance director cannot not be a certified procurement officer. Yes, that was a double negative.
Raising the contract threshold from 2,000 to 10, is that something you can just speak to?
Again,
Where's 10 come
it's
from?
antiquated, what's a reasonable amount for a bond? And in some cases, the bond would be much higher, and there'd be multiple bonds if we're doing a construction project. But I agree with the Town Government Study Committee that there should be some higher threshold than there has been, without making it unreasonable so that people wouldn't bid on things. And the only exception would be where Mass General Law dictates it, like in the case of public building construction or water and sewer construction, where you're requiring bonds of a much higher level.
Okay.
So I think it's good business practice.
Also, the 10,000 was based on other similar towns, if I
Yep.
recall.
Yeah, they did some research on that.
Okay, any additional questions? Motions, yes.
I move to vote on Article 16.
Second.
Okay,
Can
been
I-
moved and seconded.
Nope.
Additional questions?
So I was on that committee when they came up with this. Should I abstain from this? What's kind of the appropriate?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if there would be a conflict of interest in terms of, this is a bylaw, like it's not about you or your finances specifically or
Great.
your house. which
Just
is
making
why
sure
I-
that, and
Thank-
also want to put out there
thank
that I
you
was
for
part
asking.
of,
Make a note that we talked about that. Yeah, because I think the procedure is if you're concerned about a conflict of interest, you ask the chair of the advisory board. I think
Great.
that's the procedure.
thank you.
And if I get it wrong, then people will hunt me down. Okay. Moving on. So we have a motion and it's been seconded. All in favor of Article 16, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. It carries unanimously. Article 17.
The C section.
Oh, yes, numbering and lettering. And as I recall, there's general reluctance for any modification of bylaws to be allowed without express, action by something like town meeting. However, this being such an administrative housekeeping item, giving the clerk the ability to clean up the not insubstantial mess of numbering that doesn't add up and lettering which is no longer sequential, was felt to be in the best interest of usability and sanity.
A perfect example would be the one we just talked about. If for some reason the actual item that we approved at town meeting somehow screwed up 1, 2, 3, 4, and said 1, 2, 3, 5, if we pass this, the clerk would be able to change it to 1, 2, 3, 4.
Is there a second review of this, or does the clerk just go ahead and do it?
They have to go to, all of our bylaws have to go to the Attorney General's office once they go through a
So
town.
there's a second set of eyes?
There's a
that will
second
look
set
at
of
it.
eyes.
So she would make this change prior to submitting to the.
And she'd have to show
After
them,
town meeting, but prior to submitting it to the Attorney General.
and then she'd have to show them a clean version and a tracked version and why she made the changes that she made. These are ones that I'm allowed to make by bylaw because I recognize this number that wasn't sequential. And here are the bylaw changes that the town voted at town meeting, and here's what I'm asking you to approve.
Additional questions? Yes?
I have a question on, so we've already approved this money for the codification of town bylaws, which involves having an outside group review, reorg, edit. And my understanding is that this is a group that will be doing this over a course of time, not just
Mhm.
one time.
Mhm.
So what, can both those groups do those same types of changes?
Yes,
And why
if-
would we give two groups the ability to do that, or what is the
They're not
benefit
gonna
of that?
make any changes to our bylaw. When we make the changes, let's say we have a set, when we have worked with them, we put them up. And then we have to decide whether we're yearly or every couple of years. As we make changes, we then give them to go up.
Right,
They may
Okay.
make recommendations, hey, you might wanna think about this or think about that, but then it's the town's job to decide we're gonna make those changes and then codify them and put them up on the website.
okay, so they might give us advice on how to reorganize them, but this separate
It's completely
would
up to
allow
us.
Okay,
They couldn't make actual changes
Right.
to the bylaw.
They could not,
They could only
only
make-
we can,
Yeah, right.
right,
with
This would
approval.
allow the
Okay.
clerk to make those administrative changes.
great, thank you.
Additional discussion? Yes?
No,
No.
I wanna make a motion
Okay,
to vote on
go for it.
Article 17.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. All in favor of Article 17, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, passes unanimously. Article 18 is proposing one mighty severability clause instead of putting the severability language all over the place.
And I actually should have mentioned earlier that I asked town council to give some thought to where the three sections where there is severability now, whether we, as part of this article, strike those if we're putting this one new section at the end covering all. It seems silly to have the old in there with the new, so, this language might change a little bit in this, if you wanna wait on that till I get that answer from him.
Sure.
But that's what our thought was, if we're gonna clean it up, let's really clean it up, not do it halfway.
So we will postpone the vote on Article 18.
One less thing for that legal group to find, recommend.
Yes, we always want to know if the language is a little squishy, don't want to have to vote twice. And I know 19 starts our zoning
Yes.
run, which we have a date for in the future.
The 30th.
And I believe that comes to the end. Now, were there any,
There's road
Yeah, road
acceptances.
acceptances.
We're not, I wouldn't say we're ready for those yet. We're fairly well prepared for Tailwind Circle, Westfield Drive, and Silver Fox Run, but we don't yet have the deeds for Meeting House, Liberty, and Saddle Ridge, and we are working to get those, so there's a possibility we won't bring motions for those to town meeting, where it's gonna be kind of a race to the end. So,
understood, late breaking. Okay, now that comes to the end. Blythe, was there any topics that we didn't cover that you wanted to address or discuss? No? Any housekeeping items that we have?
I just have one, invoice to be signed, it's for the Association Town Finance Committee. It is, something that the advisory board does every
was here for
year.
you.
Okay,
And, you will get the committee handbook and just need everybody to sign that.
Okay, and while we're taking care of the administrative fund, I believe you are all set. We can let you guys go. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
It's already late.
did you say you need all of us to sign?
I think it's like 3, or is that?
Well, no, it's a quorum,
It's a quorum, okay.
yep.
I should let everyone know that I heard from a little birdie that there's 500 feet of pipe going on Holbrook Street and the other 1,000 are within the well site. Thank you, Todd and Bob, I'm assuming, for giving us that information.
Awesome.
Sure.
Good
So
night,
that's being
thank you.
passed around.
Thank
See you next week.
Business. Thank you again.
No, I just wanna, is there anybody that won't make next week? Kristen, yep,
It's next Wednesday.
yep.
And so are we going to do all the things we postponed except for the zoning, which we
Except for
will
the
do?
zoning and public
Right,
streets.
so it'll be a fairly quick meeting.
Okay.
Um,
If I can bring my kids, I'll be here. I don't think you want them here.
okay, I just wanted to kinda confirm that.
Yes, so in general, going forward, if folks are aware of absences, please let Susan know sooner rather than later. Obviously, things come up and there's last minute issues, of course, but the better we can plan, makes it easier for everyone. Also, as a side note, when Susan sends out an email asking if people can attend, feel free to hit reply and not reply at all.
I actually
Pet
find
peeve
it
of mine.
helpful, well, I was gonna say, it's only 7 minutes. It's helpful to track who's coming.
The last email was email if you were not gonna be there, right?
Yes.
Right, well, cause I try it several different ways to, like tonight, we were just a quorum, and I didn't realize that we were going to be just a quorum until 7:01. So,
Did we vote to adjourn?
I would like to. There's some murky gray area as to whether we need to. I just love it so much. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye.